Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing a comparison between similar, yet in some ways very different ways of achieving your sound, both of which I have used for practice, rehearsals, and live. In the purple corner, we've got the Neural DSP Quad Cortex, and in the green corner, we've got BIAS FX on the iPad. For your convenience, I'll be talking about the differences between these two rigs in order of what I consider to be most impactful or important. Some of these sections can be quite long, like the sound comparison, so feel free to use the chapters in the timeline to skip ahead to the part that you're interested in. The biggest difference between these two is, of course, the price. Now, there are many ways of achieving sound on a mobile device, but we're specifically looking at using BIAS FX on the iPad and using the XSonic interface to hook up our guitar. This is the setup that I've actually used and it's worked very well for me, so I've had no reason to look elsewhere in this category. You can also use various devices at very different price points in place of the iPad, so I'm not actually considering the iPad in the total price of this rig. Plus, the iPad also has merit as an entertainment and productivity device, so including its price in the total is kind of like including how much you paid for your car in the price of your 4x12 cabinet. On the other hand, we've got the Quad Cortex, on which you can't play Angry Birds or your favorite Netflix TV show, but it can do the sound bit pretty damn well. For most of us, it's gonna come down to the price, and the TLDR of the rest of this comparison is basically the 80-20 ratio. If you're happy getting 80% of the Quad Cortex for 20% of the money, or more like 10% of the money, then spoiler, go with this option. And if you want a nearly uncompromised solution in terms of sound and usability, and are happy paying 10 times more for it, then the Quad Cortex is for you. Boom, video over, I just saved you 10 minutes, you're welcome. Are all the fake nerds gone? Alright, let's get to the juicy stuff, and next up is sound. I would say that the Quad Cortex is very close to uncompromised when it comes to sound when compared to real amp and cabinet combos. And although some would disagree, I would actually say that BIAS FX is no slouch in the sound department either, but unfortunately, in my opinion at least, it just doesn't compare to the richness and depth of the Quad Cortex simulations. This isn't meant to be an in-depth, comprehensive sound comparison, otherwise we'd be here all night, but I want to at least show you how the rigs that I actually use on both of these sound in a couple of scenarios. And as for the rigs, on the Quad Cortex, I'm using a Bogner Ubershell amp model alongside an Angle 4x12 cabinet with V30s in it. And as for the iPad rig, I'm using an EVH 5153 model alongside an orange cabinet with V30s in it. As per tradition, let's start with the midsection of one of my band's songs. See if you can spot the difference in delay trail carryover when I come out of the lead section and back into the rhythm. For this demo, I'm going to be using my LTD M1 with the Seymour Duncan distortion in the bridge. I may be biased, but to me, those delay trails remaining actually make a huge difference. After hearing that space remain live when coming out of a lead section, I think based on that one difference alone, I am already unable to go back to my iPad as my main rig. But the question is, how much does it matter to you? Now let's listen to a couple of riffs from a work in progress song to compare the general rhythm sounds between the two rigs. By the way, I did not try to make the two rigs sound the same, and I also did not spend a huge amount of time tweaking the sound. I just picked something that will work for rehearsals and live. So after hearing that, personally, I don't think there is a world of a difference between these two, at least when they're part of the mix. But what do you think? Okay, next up is reliability. And as I've mentioned in my previous videos about the iPad rig, it has more points of failure than a traditional floor unit. The biggest of which is this USB cable that connects the iPad to the audio interface. The USB connector is just not robust enough when it comes to on-stage situations where you've got people running around in boots and lugging around gear, etc. Plus, the iPad is not a specialized device, so I would consider it to be less reliable on that basis. But a counterpoint against the Quad Cortex is that it has a really flimsy power cable and it's completely reliant on it since it does not run on battery power, unlike the iPad, which has enough battery power to last you several shows, and the audio interface also runs off of the iPad power. In addition to that, the Quad Cortex has an extremely long startup time. I timed it at 48 seconds. Imagine if you or someone else accidentally tripped on or pulled out the power cable during a live performance. You'd be without sound for the better part of a minute, and that's just an insanely long time in that situation. So both setups have downsides, but I would still give the slight edge here to the Quad Cortex because it is just one unit versus two, and also it's built a lot more like a tank than the iPad. Okay, next up is functionality. You can get more capable I/O devices to use with the iPad, but it's just not going to compare to the Quad Cortex in this department. The Quad Cortex has almost everything I personally need and more, except for an amp control output, which would be really nice, but it even has two XLR inputs, so you could hook up your mics to it and it can provide phantom power. The Quad Cortex can update itself over Wi-Fi without the need to connect to a computer. I mean, that's exactly the same as the iPad, but for a modeler, come on, that's damn impressive. On the Quad Cortex, you can also route your outputs however you like, including splitting your signal right before your cab sim, so that you can send one signal to the front of house, which is your full simulation, full rig, and sending a signal that's split off right before your cab sim into a real power amp and real cabinet for stage volume. And it can run 4 instruments simultaneously. Do I even need to say more? Hang on, let me get a mic so I can drop it. Next up is ease of use. And while the Quad Cortex is a huge improvement over most of its competitors with its massive responsive touchscreen, it still does not compare to the even bigger and even more responsive screen of the iPad. The bigger screen of the iPad means that either more UI elements can be present on the screen at any one time, therefore reducing the amount of interactions you need to do anything, or that the UI can be designed to be more intuitive. And that is definitely my personal experience with these two units. I've been using modelers for a while, and I've actually had to check the manual on how to do several things on the Quad Cortex, such as splitting the signal chain, whereas I've never had to look up how to do anything in BIAS FX on the iPad. And just as a very simple demonstration for you, let me show you what the process of swapping out an amp looks like on both of these units. So here I actually cut out a bunch of footage where I was looking for stuff on the Quad Cortex because, as you can see, it doesn't have visual representations of stuff. Now, the intuitiveness of the UI is not the biggest consideration for me personally here because all you need to do is to learn how to do the things that you need to do, and that stops being a problem. But things taking slightly longer on the Quad Cortex is probably the more impactful difference here. So the last thing I wanted to mention is portability, and obviously there isn't a huge difference here, but at least in my case, the iPad rig requires a bit of extra stuff to make it a full rig. I actually have a small pedal board that holds the audio interface, my wireless system, and a tuner, and in that form, it's definitely a little bit more difficult to pack than the Quad Cortex. The other side of the coin here is that you don't need to use a pedal board, or you can use an even smaller one, not to mention the fact that the iPad can be swapped out for an even smaller device like an iPhone, and at that point, this rig can become almost pocketable. So what are my overall thoughts? Well, the biggest takeaway for me is that it's absolutely amazing how much we can get out of the iPad rig considering its price when compared to the Quad Cortex. That is not to say though that I don't think that the Quad Cortex is worth it. I wanted to have a unit that could provide the very best sound outside of real amps for any situation, such as recording at home, rehearsals, or live. And the Quad Cortex is definitely that unit, and I'm very, very happy with it. Can I justify the difference in price? Personally, yes, because I know that this is as good as I can get going digital at the moment. But can I justify it based solely on the merits of the two rigs? Well, no, the Quad Cortex is not 10 times better than BIAS, even if you consider the diminishing returns of paying more for higher quality. The way I see it though, and this will of course differ from person to person, but I could get a really nice amp for the same price as the Quad Cortex, or maybe even an amp and a cab combo, but the Quad Cortex can do 90 to 95% of the quality of a real amp, to my ear at least. And of course, it can simulate any amp and any cab. So to me, that's a no-brainer. So what are your opinions? Are you team 80/20 or team 20/80? Let us know in the comments. That's actually a cool slogan. I'm imagining a t-shirt that says Team 80/20. Pretty good idea. Team 20/80 people and others interested in finding out about my experiences with the Quad Cortex, this is the video you want to watch next. Team 80/20 and those of you interested in finding out more about the iPad rig, this is your video right here. But that's it for this one. As always, thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one.